They mocked him as a farm boy because he claimed he could hunt without seeing. In December 1944, when fog swallowed the forests of Bastogne and blinded entire units, the men who laughed at him learned the truth, because the fog didn't hide the enemy from him. It revealed them. When Private First Class Samuel Bridger arrived as a replacement, no one saw a weapon. They saw a liability. He was quiet, broad-shouldered, and spoke with the slow vowels of rural Iowa. His service papers listed his occupation as farmer, and that single word was enough to define him in the eyes of the platoon. To men from New York, Chicago, and Boston soldiers, hardened by city streets and factory life, farm boy meant uneducated, unsophisticated, and unfit for modern war. They laughed at the way he listened instead of looking. They laughed when he said he could smell men moving through the woods. They laughed hardest when he claimed he could shoot accurately in fog. In an army that trained soldiers to fight with their eyes, identify targets, range them, aim and fire, Bridger's habits looked backward, almost primitive. While others scanned tree lines with strained eyes, he lay still, head tilted slightly, breathing slow, listening to the world around him as if the forest itself were speaking. He had learned that habit long before he ever wore a uniform. Growing up in rural Iowa during the Depression, Sam Bridger learned early that missing a shot meant more than wounded pride. It meant wasted money. It meant an empty table. His father taught him to hunt not with speed, but with patience, not with volume, but with precision. Deer moved quietly, but never silently. Snow carried sound. Fog carried scent. The land always betrayed those who walked through it carelessly. By the time he was 12, Sam could track game he couldn't see. By 15, he was feeding his family. By adulthood, his instincts were automatic. But none of that mattered in the barracks. To the men around him, Bridger was just another replacement, unblooded, untested, and mocked for the dirt under his fingernails and the way he trusted his senses more than his sights. He endured the jokes without protest, saying little, knowing something they didn't. Combat doesn't care where you come from, and it doesn't reward confidence, only capability. In the frozen forests outside Bastogne, that lesson was about to be taught the hard way. December 1944 stripped war down to its rawest form. As the German offensive slammed into the Ardennes, the forests around Bastogne disappeared under snow, smoke, and fog so thick it erased distance itself. Visibility collapsed to 20, sometimes 10 yards. Men stared into white nothingness, unsure where the enemy ended and the forest began. For most soldiers, training stopped working. They had learned to fight by seeing, spotting movement, reading terrain, identifying silhouettes. But now there were no silhouettes, only shapes, only sound. And sound, in the frozen woods, played tricks on the untrained ear. Footsteps echoed, branches cracked without warning, voices carried and vanished, nerves frayed, fingers tightened on triggers. Entire squads froze, afraid to move and afraid not to. Samuel Bridger did not freeze. Where others strained their eyes, he closed his. He listened the way he had listened as a boy in Iowa fog, not for noise, but for patterns. The rhythm of boots on frozen ground, the unnatural pause of men trying to move quietly, the faint metallic click of rifle parts brushing fabric, even the smell of tobacco drifting against the wind. He heard them long before anyone else did. The first time Bridger warned his platoon sergeant, the reaction was disbelief. How can you know they're there if you can't see them? Bridger didn't argue. He simply gave distances, directions, numbers. Minutes later, German soldiers emerged from the fog exactly where he said they would. From that moment, the laughter stopped, but only briefly. The men still didn't understand how he knew. They only knew that in weather where sight failed completely, Bridger remained calm, still, and deadly aware. When the order came to hold the Bastogne perimeter at all costs, every weakness in training was exposed. Fog became an ally to the Germans and a curse to the Americans, except for one farm boy who had spent his entire life learning to hunt without seeing, and now The fog that blinded everyone else was about to become his greatest weapon. Dawn on December 23rd came without light. At 0540 hours, the forest north of Bastogne was sealed inside frozen fog so dense it swallowed sound itself. Men could barely see their own boots. Rifles pointed into nothing. Every breath felt loud. Every second stretched. Samuel Bridger lay prone in a shallow depression he had scraped from the frozen earth hours earlier. He hadn't moved. He hadn't needed to. His M1 Garand rested against his shoulder, the metal dulled with burlap strips torn from a sandbag to kill any trace of shine. He was listening, not for voices, but for mistakes. The Germans were careful, but careful was not silent. Frozen ground cracked under weight. Boots paused too long, then moved again. A bolt slid back slowly, metal whispering against metal. To Bridger, the sound painted a picture clearer than sight ever could. 8 men, moving parallel to the American line, less than 50 yards. He adjusted his position inch by inch, movements so slow they were invisible even at arm's length. His breathing slowed until it matched the rhythm of the forest itself. At 0543, the fog released them. Dark shapes emerged, closer than any soldier should ever want an enemy to be. The lead German stepped forward cautiously, rifle half raised, still believing the fog protected him. Bridger fired. The first man dropped before the sound of the shot finished echoing. Bridger was already on the second target, then the third, then the fourth. The M1 Garand cracked again and again. Rapid, controlled, precise. 12 seconds. 7 shots. 6 German soldiers fell into the snow without ever knowing where death had come from. The survivors broke, shouting, stumbling, firing blindly into the fog as they ran. Bridger fired one final round, and another body collapsed into the white silence. Then he stopped. No follow-up, no panic. He melted back into stillness as if nothing had happened. 7 kills in 12 seconds. When the platoon finally understood what had just occurred, no one spoke. The fog that had terrified them had become a killing ground, controlled by a man they had laughed at for weeks. The farm boy, who claimed he could hunt without seeing, had just proven something far more terrifying. This was not luck. This was not a single moment. It was the beginning. Over the next 10 days, the fog would return again and again, and each time it did, German soldiers would die without ever seeing the man who killed them. By the 4th day of the siege, the Germans had learned something was wrong. Patrols sent into the fog north of Bastogne stopped coming back. Men were found dead with precise wounds, no signs of struggle, no indication of where the shots had come from. Officers increased reconnaissance, then reduced it again when fear began to spread. To the Americans of Company C, the explanation was simple. Bridger. His role changed quietly, without ceremony. He was no longer just a rifleman in the line. He became the warning system. When Bridger said men were moving, positions went on alert. When he pointed into the fog, machine guns covered that sector without question. He detected German movement before flares were fired, before grenades landed, before a single American rifle could see a target. The fog had turned most soldiers blind. Bridger operated inside it. On December 22nd and 23rd, German forces probed the perimeter repeatedly, searching for weak points. Each time, Bridger heard them first. He smelled tobacco before boots appeared. He felt vibrations through frozen ground that told him whether men were walking cautiously or preparing to rush. He didn't chase. He waited. German soldiers stepped out of the fog and died mid-stride. Others vanished into the trees after watching men fall without warning. Fear did what artillery could not. Patrol discipline collapsed. Reconnaissance slowed. Gaps appeared in German planning. By Christmas Eve, Bridger was authorized to operate alone. Moving through no man's land in weather that erased direction, he stalked German assembly areas the way he once stalked deer. He identified command posts, artillery positions, and routes of movement, slipping back unseen to guide American fire. When targets presented themselves, he took them. When they didn't, he vanished. The kill count climbed 17 one day, 27 the next. German documents captured later would describe an invisible American hunter operating in the fog, killing without warning, destroying morale more effectively than shell fire. Men refused patrol assignments. Officers rerouted attacks away from his sector. The farm boy had become something else entirely, not a sniper in the traditional sense, not a hero seeking attention, but a presence, a man the enemy could not see, could not predict, and could not stop using, nothing more than instincts learned long before the war, now amplified by the very conditions meant to break him. And the worst was still coming. Christmas Day brought no peace. The fog thinned just enough to reveal movement, and with it came the heaviest German assault of the siege. Infantry pushed forward behind armor, determined to break into Bastogne before relief could arrive. The forest shook with artillery. Snow churned into mud. Men screamed for medics who could not reach them. Samuel Bridger took position in the upper floor of an abandoned farmhouse overlooking a critical approach route. From there, he could see, and more importantly, hear everything. For 90 minutes, the fight never stopped. German infantry advanced in waves, following tanks that drew American fire. When they paused, Bridger fired. When they ran, he fired. When they thought they were hidden, he fired. His M1 Garand snapped again and again, methodical, relentless, each shot placed where it would not be wasted. He did not rush. He did not miss. Witnesses would later say it felt unreal, one rifle controlling an entire sector. German attacks stalled, then broke, not under machine gun fire or artillery barrages, but under the steady pressure of a single man who refused to let them move. By the time the attack collapsed, Bridger had fired more than 160 rounds. 41 German soldiers lay dead. Shrapnel from an artillery burst tore into his left shoulder, but he refused evacuation. Others were worse off, he said. He reloaded, shifted position, and stayed. When Patton's Third Army finally broke through on December 26th, the siege ended, but Bridger did not stop fighting. He covered German withdrawals, engaging rear guards with the same cold precision that had defined the previous days. When the counting finally stopped, the number shocked even hardened officers. 119 confirmed German kills in 13 days. Not from a sniper school, not from advanced optics, not from special weapons, from a farm boy who had learned as a child that survival meant listening when others relied only on sight. The men who had mocked him never laughed again, and the fog, which had terrified entire divisions, would forever be remembered by them as the place where one quiet rifleman turned instinct into devastation and proved that the battlefield does not reward where you come from, only what you can do when everything else fails. Samuel Bridger never celebrated the number. 119 confirmed kills became a line in after-action reports, a statistic historians would debate, and a figure that stunned anyone who heard it. But to Bridger, it was never a tally of victory. It was a record of days he could never forget. He understood something many never do, that being effective in war does not make war noble. The fog that hid him also hid the faces of the men he killed. They were soldiers, like him, shaped by circumstances they did not choose. His skill had ended their lives, but it had also saved the lives of the men who once laughed at him. The mockery disappeared. The respect remained. But Bridger carried the weight quietly long after the guns fell silent. The lesson of Bastogne was never about a farm boy proving himself better than others. It was about how easily people dismiss what they do not understand. Skills born from hardship, poverty, or obscurity often go unnoticed until the moment they become indispensable. In the end, the fog revealed more than enemies. It revealed that strength comes from diversity, that backgrounds shape capabilities, and that the most dangerous man on the battlefield is often the one no one takes seriously until it is far too late. That is the story of how they mocked him as farm boy, and how 13 days in the Ardennes proved them wrong forever. Samuel "Sam" Bridger arrived at the front with nothing that impressed anyone. He was quiet, thin, spoke with a rural Iowa accent that drew smirks from men raised in New York, Chicago, and Boston. His service record listed his occupation as farmer, a word that inside an elite airborne unit might as well have meant slow, uneducated, and replaceable. Within hours, he had a nickname, Farm Boy. It was never said kindly. To the men around him, Bridger looked like someone out of place in modern war. He didn't talk tactics. He didn't brag about training. He didn't pretend to understand urban jokes or slang. He listened more than he spoke, watched more than he acted, and kept his gear simple and worn. That silence only reinforced the stereotype. Quiet meant stupid. Country meant backward. What none of them understood was that Bridger had already spent his life in a different kind of battlefield. He had grown up in rural Iowa during the Depression, where missing a shot didn't mean embarrassment, it meant hunger. His father taught him to hunt not for sport, but for survival. Ammunition cost money they didn't have, so every round had to count. Young Sam learned early that the first shot mattered more than any second chance. He learned to hunt in fog so thick the woods disappeared. He learned to track by sound when sight failed, boots on frost, breath in cold air, a branch bent the wrong way. He learned to smell wood smoke on the wind and know how long ago a fire had burned. By the time he was 15, he could follow wounded deer for miles without seeing them once. Those skills didn't look like intelligence in a barracks. They didn't fit manuals or classroom instruction. They couldn't be explained in neat sentences. So they were dismissed. In basic training, Bridger rarely spoke unless spoken to. When rifle qualification came, he didn't talk then either, he just shot. And when the targets dropped one after another, instructors noticed something strange. He wasn't calculating windage. He wasn't adjusting carefully. He simply raised the rifle and fired, as if he already knew where the bullet would land. Urban soldiers struggled to understand how. Bridger couldn't explain it himself. He had never learned shooting as theory. He had learned it as instinct, built from thousands of rounds fired in cold mornings when missing meant empty plates. Still, instinct didn't earn respect. Not yet. When Bridger was assigned as a replacement to the unit that would soon be sent to Bastogne, the mockery followed him intact. He hadn't jumped into Normandy. He hadn't fought in Market Garden. He was just another quiet farm kid, filling a hole left by a dead man. No one expected much from him. And in December 1944, as the fog closed in and the snow began to fall, no one yet realized that everything they believed about fighting, about skill, intelligence, and who belonged on the line was about to collapse. By the time the trucks rolled into Bastogne, the jokes had stopped, but not because respect had replaced them. They stopped because fear had. The German offensive had come out of the Ardennes like a hammer, smashing through thin American lines and swallowing entire units before anyone understood what was happening. Bastogne wasn't supposed to be a battlefield. It was a crossroads, a place to pass through. Now it was the hinge holding the front together, and the 101st Airborne was ordered to hold it at all costs. By December 21st, they were surrounded. Snow fell constantly. Temperatures dropped below freezing. Fog hung so thick in the forests that a man could vanish 10 steps away. For soldiers trained to fight by sight, by spotting movement, muzzle flashes, silhouettes, the world had gone blind. Patrols walked into ambushes. Listening posts failed to hear enemy approach until boots were already inside the wire. Tension crept into every foxhole. That was when Samuel Bridger began to notice things no one else did. While others strained their eyes into white nothingness, Bridger lay still and listened. Not just heard, but separated, sound the way a hunter does, distinguishing wind from movement, snow falling from snow being stepped on. He noticed rhythms, patterns, the unnatural pauses of men trying to move quietly. At first, he said nothing. Then, late on December 21st, he leaned toward his squad leader and spoke in a low, flat voice. "They're out there." The response was immediate and irritated. "You can't see anything," the sergeant whispered. "No one can." Bridger shook his head. "Don't need to see them." He described what he was hearing. Boots, compressing frozen ground instead of drifting snow, metal clicking softly, rifle bolts being eased forward. Too deliberate, too controlled to be animals. He estimated numbers, spacing, direction of travel. He even mentioned the smell, cheap tobacco drifting faintly through the fog. The sergeant stared at him, unconvinced but uneasy. Minutes later, dark shapes materialized exactly where Bridger had said they would. The firefight was brief. The Germans pulled back fast, shaken by resistance they hadn't expected so early. When it was over, the sergeant turned back to Bridger, his expression no longer mocking, but unsettled. "How did you know?" he asked. Bridger shrugged. "Same way I know when deer move through timber back home. Sound, scent, pressure in the ground. Disturbances where nothing should be disturbed." That night, Bridger was quietly repositioned closer to the front of the defensive line. Not officially, not on paper, just closer to where things mattered. The fog grew thicker as the siege tightened, and as visibility vanished, something else became clear. The farm boy wasn't losing effectiveness in the Ardennes winter. He was becoming more dangerous. The story of Samuel Bridger is often reduced to a number: 119 confirmed kills in 13 days. It is a number that shocks, impresses, and invites comparison. But focusing on the number alone misses the deeper truth of what Bastogne revealed. Bridger's story is not about killing efficiently. It is about how war strips away assumptions and exposes the real value of human experience. Before Bastogne, Bridger's background was treated as a weakness. Farm boy was not just a nickname, it was a judgment. It implied backwardness, limited intelligence, and irrelevance in a modern, mechanized war. His rural skills were seen as outdated in an army that valued standardization, doctrine, and formal training. Combat proved how shallow that judgment was. When fog erased sight, the most relied upon sense in infantry training, the battlefield did not become random. It simply rewarded different skills. Soldiers who depended entirely on vision became ineffective. Soldiers who had never needed to listen closely, smell the air, or feel the ground lost awareness. Bridger did not gain an advantage because he was superior. He gained it because his life had forced him to develop skills others never needed. That is the first lesson. Capability is situational, not universal. What looks useless in one environment may become decisive in another. Bridger's childhood poverty forced efficiency. Every bullet mattered. Every mistake had consequences. Those conditions created instincts that formal training could not replicate. When the environment of war aligned with those instincts, they became lethal. The second lesson is more uncomfortable. Mockery often reveals ignorance, not insight. The men who laughed at Bridger were not cruel by nature. They were products of their own environments. Urban life had rewarded different skills: social navigation, mechanical familiarity, visual awareness. Because rural skills had no value in their world, they assumed those skills had no value anywhere. War punished that assumption. This pattern extends far beyond the battlefield. People routinely dismiss others based on accent, background, education, or appearance. Bridger's story reminds us that unseen skills remain unseen only until circumstances demand them. Writing people off based on surface traits is not efficiency, it is blindness. Another lesson lies in Bridger's restraint. Despite his effectiveness, he never glorified what he did. He did not chase kills. He did not seek recognition. He shot when necessary, stopped when it was no longer required, and carried the weight of his actions long after the war ended. His reflections decades later reveal a man deeply aware that tactical success does not erase moral cost. This matters. In modern storytelling, especially around war, effectiveness is often mistaken for virtue. Bridger rejected that idea completely. He understood that being good at killing does not make killing good. His humility challenges the simplistic narratives that reduce war to heroes and villains, scores and statistics. That leads to the next lesson. Moral clarity can coexist with tactical necessity. Bridger did not deny the necessity of his actions. He also did not celebrate them. He held both truths at once. That balance, acknowledging necessity without romanticizing violence, is rare and valuable, not only in war, but in leadership, responsibility, and power. Another critical lesson from Bastogne is about diversity of capability. Military institutions traditionally emphasize uniformity, same training, same doctrine, same procedures. Bridger's performance demonstrated the limits of that approach. His effectiveness came precisely because he was different. He brought something the system did not produce on its own. Modern organizations increasingly recognize this truth. Teams succeed not because everyone thinks the same way, but because they bring different perspectives that activate under different conditions. Bridger was not a replacement for trained soldiers, he was a complement. His presence expanded what the unit could do. Finally, Bridger's story teaches a deeply human lesson about identity. The mockery stopped when his skills became valuable. The praise arrived only when circumstances changed. But Bridger himself did not change. The skills were always there. Only perception shifted. This reveals an uncomfortable truth. People are often valued not for who they are, but for what they can immediately provide. When usefulness disappears, respect often follows. Bridger saw this contradiction clearly, and it troubled him for the rest of his life. His experience warns us against tying human worth solely to performance or productivity. In the end, the fog of Bastogne did more than hide armies. It exposed assumptions. It punished arrogance. It rewarded humility and adaptation. Samuel Bridger's legacy is not the number of men he killed. It is the reminder that strength comes from unexpected places, that judgment based on background is shallow, and that true effectiveness often belongs to those who never sought attention only to do their job well when everything else failed. That is the real lesson of the farm boy in the fog. Samuel Bridger's story is often reduced to a statistic: 119 confirmed kills in 13 days. It is a number that demands attention, invites disbelief, and risks turning a human experience into a scoreboard. But the true lesson of Bastogne has nothing to do with numbers. It lies in what the battlefield revealed about assumptions, adaptability, and the hidden value of human experience. Before the siege, Bridger was dismissed. Farm boy was not an affectionate label. It was a verdict. To soldiers raised in cities, his rural background suggested backwardness. He spoke little. He trusted instinct more than procedure. He listened instead of constantly scanning the horizon. In an army that emphasized standardized training and visual dominance, Bridger appeared obsolete, a relic unsuited for modern war. War stripped that illusion away. When the fog descended on the Ardennes, it erased the battlefield doctrine depended on. Vision failed. Distance became meaningless. Familiar training collapsed under conditions it had not been designed to handle. The battlefield did not become chaotic, it became selective. That is the first lesson. Effectiveness is situational. Skills do not exist in isolation. Their value depends entirely on context. Bridger did not suddenly become exceptional in December 1944. His abilities had existed for years, shaped by necessity rather than theory. Hunting in poverty taught him efficiency. Fog taught him patience. Missed shots meant hunger. Carelessness meant failure. Those conditions created instincts no training manual could replicate. Formal military training was not wrong, it was incomplete. It prepared soldiers for typical conditions, not extreme ones. Bridger's background filled the gap when doctrine reached its limits. His effectiveness was not superiority. It was alignment between experience and environment. The second lesson is uncomfortable but universal. Mockery is often a substitute for understanding. The men who mocked Bridger were not cruel. They were confident. Their environments had rewarded different skills, so they assumed those skills were universally superior. Because rural abilities had no value in their world, they assumed those abilities had no value anywhere. War punished that assumption. This pattern repeats far beyond the battlefield. In workplaces, institutions, and societies, people are dismissed based on background, accent, education, or appearance. Bridger's story exposes how shallow such judgments are. Unseen capabilities remain invisible only until circumstances demand them. Another critical lesson lies in Bridger's restraint. Despite his extraordinary effectiveness, he never glorified what he did. He did not chase kills. He did not speak of pride. He acted when necessary, stopped when it was no longer required, and carried the weight of his actions for the rest of his life. This matters deeply. Modern war narratives often confuse effectiveness with virtue. Bridger rejected that confusion entirely. He understood that being good at killing does not make killing good. His later reflections reveal a man who accepted military necessity while refusing to romanticize violence. That leads to a vital moral lesson. Tactical success does not erase human cost. Bridger acknowledged that his actions saved American lives. He also acknowledged that they ended German ones. Both truths existed simultaneously. He refused to simplify that reality into heroism alone. This moral clarity, holding necessity and tragedy together, is rare and essential. Another lesson from Bastogne concerns diversity of capability. Military institutions traditionally emphasize uniformity, same drills, same doctrine, same expectations. Bridger's performance demonstrated the limits of that approach. His value came precisely because he was different. He brought skills the system did not produce. Modern organizations increasingly recognize this principle. Teams succeed not because everyone thinks the same way, but because different experiences activate under different conditions. Bridger did not replace trained soldiers, he complemented them. His presence expanded what the unit could do when standard methods failed. There is also a lesson about identity. The mockery stopped only when Bridger's skills became valuable. Respect arrived only when circumstances changed. Bridger himself did not change. His abilities had always been there. Only perception shifted. This reveals an uncomfortable truth. People are often valued only when their usefulness is obvious. When that usefulness disappears, respect often follows. Bridger recognized this contradiction and carried it with him long after the war. His experience warns against tying human worth solely to immediate performance or visible success. Finally, Bastogne teaches a lesson about humility before environment. The fog did not care who was educated, confident, or proud. It rewarded those who adapted and punished those who assumed the world would conform to their expectations. Bridger survived not because he dominated the environment, but because he listened to it. That lesson extends beyond war. Life rarely unfolds under ideal conditions. Plans fail, assumptions collapse. Those who endure are often not the strongest or the loudest, but the ones willing to adjust how they perceive the world. Awareness, adaptability, and humility matter more than rigid confidence. In the end, the fog of Bastogne did more than hide armies. It exposed arrogance. It punished certainty. It revealed quiet competence. Samuel Bridger's legacy is not the number of men he killed. It is the reminder that value often comes from unexpected places, that judgment based on background is shallow, and that true effectiveness often belongs to those who never sought recognition only to do what was required when everything else failed. That is the real lesson of the farm boy in the fog. Samuel Bridger's story is often summarized by a single figure, 119. It is a number that shocks, demands attention, and tempts simplification. Numbers are easy to remember. They feel precise, objective, and complete. But war is never complete when reduced to numbers. Behind every statistic is a human decision, a human consequence, and a truth that cannot be measured. The real lesson of Bastogne does not lie in how many men Samuel Bridger killed. It lies in what his experience revealed about human judgment, adaptability, and the hidden value of backgrounds that are too easily dismissed. Before the siege, Bridger was not seen as dangerous or exceptional. He was tolerated, mocked, labeled. Farm Boy was not a harmless nickname. It was a verdict passed by men who believed modern war belonged to modern minds. To them, rural life meant simplicity, backwardness, and irrelevance. Bridger's silence reinforced the stereotype. His instincts seemed unscientific. His reliance on sound and scent felt primitive in an army trained to fight through sight, optics, and standardized procedures. War exposed the fragility of that belief. When fog rolled into the Ardennes, it erased the battlefield doctrine depended on. Vision failed. Distances collapsed. Familiar training lost reliability. Soldiers who had been confident minutes earlier became uncertain. The environment did not become chaotic, it became selective. That is the first lesson. Effectiveness is situational, not absolute. Skills do not exist in a vacuum. Their value is determined by circumstance. Bridger did not suddenly become exceptional in December 1944. His abilities had existed for decades, shaped by necessity rather than instruction. Poverty had forced precision. Hunting had demanded patience. Fog had trained awareness beyond sight. Formal military training had not failed, it had reached its limits. It was designed for typical conditions, not extreme ones. Bridger's background filled the gap where doctrine stopped. His effectiveness was not superiority. It was alignment between experience and environment. The second lesson is uncomfortable but universal. Mockery often replaces understanding. The men who mocked Bridger were not evil or malicious. They were confident in what had worked for them. Their environments had rewarded different skills, so they assumed those skills were universally superior. Because rural abilities had no value in their lives, they assumed those abilities had no value anywhere. War punished that assumption. This pattern repeats far beyond the battlefield. In workplaces, institutions, and societies, people are judged by accent, education, background, or appearance. Bridger's story demonstrates how shallow those judgments are. Unseen capabilities remain invisible only until circumstances demand them. Dismissing people based on surface traits is not efficiency, it is blindness. Another lesson lies in Bridger's restraint. Despite his extraordinary effectiveness, he never celebrated what he did. He did not chase kills. He did not treat combat as competition. He fired when necessary, stopped when it was no longer required, and carried the weight of his actions long after the war ended. This matters. Modern storytelling often confuses effectiveness with virtue. Bridger rejected that confusion entirely. He understood that being good at killing does not make killing good. His reflections later in life reveal a man who accepted military necessity without romanticizing violence. That leads to a vital moral lesson. Tactical success does not erase human cost. Bridger acknowledged that his actions saved American lives. He also acknowledged that they ended German ones. Both truths existed at the same time. He refused to simplify his experience into heroism alone. That ability to hold moral complexity, to accept necessity without celebration, is rare and essential. Another lesson from Bastogne concerns diversity of capability. Military institutions traditionally emphasize uniformity. Same drills, same doctrine, same expectations. Bridger's performance demonstrated the limits of that approach. His value came precisely because he was different. He brought skills the system did not create. Modern organizations increasingly recognize this principle. Teams do not succeed because everyone thinks the same way, but because different experiences activate under different conditions. Bridger did not replace trained soldiers, he complemented them. His presence expanded what the unit could do when standard methods failed. There is also a lesson about identity. The mockery stopped only when Bridger's skills became valuable. Respect arrived only when circumstances changed. Bridger himself did not change. His abilities were always there. Only perception shifted. This reveals an uncomfortable truth. People are often valued only when their usefulness becomes obvious. When that usefulness fades, respect often fades with it. Bridger recognized this contradiction clearly, and it troubled him long after the war. His experience warns against tying human worth solely to performance, productivity, or immediate relevance. Finally, Bastogne teaches a lesson about humility before environment. The fog did not care who was educated, confident, or proud. It rewarded those who adapted and punished those who assumed the world would conform to their expectations. Bridger survived not because he dominated the environment, but because he listened to it. That lesson extends beyond war. Life rarely unfolds under ideal conditions. Plans fail. Assumptions collapse. Those who endure are often not the strongest or the loudest, but the ones willing to adjust how they perceive the world. Awareness, adaptability, and humility matter more than rigid confidence. In the end, the fog of Bastogne did more than hide armies. It exposed arrogance. It punished certainty. It revealed quiet competence. Samuel Bridger's legacy is not the number of men he killed. It is the reminder that value often comes from unexpected places, that judgment based on background is shallow, and that true effectiveness often belongs to those who never sought recognition only to do what was required when everything else failed. That is the real lesson of the farm boy in the fog. And that is the part most war stories leave out. After Bastogne, Samuel Bridger returned to being just another soldier on paper. No special unit, no celebrity treatment, no stories told around campfires. The army recorded his actions, pinned a medal to his chest, and moved on to the next problem the war demanded to be solved. But inside the men who had fought beside him, something permanent had shifted. They had seen a belief collapse in real time, the belief that intelligence looks a certain way, that skill comes from formal training alone, that backgrounds can be ranked from useful to useless. Bastogne proved that assumption wrong in blood and snow. What saved them wasn't doctrine. It wasn't equipment. It wasn't modernity. It was a man shaped by necessity. A boy who learned to listen because seeing wasn't always possible. A hunter who learned patience because rushing meant starvation. A farm kid who learned restraint because every bullet mattered. War didn't create those skills. It merely revealed them. And that is the uncomfortable truth. Bridger himself never escaped. The world only values certain abilities when disaster makes them unavoidable. Before the fog, he was mocked. Inside the fog, he was indispensable. After the fog lifted, the world returned to judging by appearances again. Bastogne taught a lesson far larger than one man's kill count. That when systems fail, when technology falters, when visibility disappears, what matters most is not where you came from, but what you learned when no one was watching. Samuel Bridger didn't become dangerous because he went to war. He was dangerous long before it, because life had already trained him for the moment everyone else was unprepared to face. Courage is what remains after fear has taken everything else. The battle for Paco Station did not conclude with the fall of its walls, nor with the silence that followed the last grenade. It ended in something far quieter, far heaviest, a kind of mourning disguised as victory. What happened inside that shattered railway terminal was not simply a triumph of courage over fear. It was a reminder that some victories are won only by cutting pieces off one's soul. In the smoke and dust of Manila, amidst, Cleto Rodriguez walked back toward American lines alone. The machine gun he carried had grown silent. The adrenaline that had carried him through 2.5 hours of violence had drained away, leaving only the tremor of someone who had done what needed to be done, not what any human heart was designed to endure. Behind him, in the ruins of that concrete fortress, lay the bodies of 82 enemies, men he had never spoken soldiers to, never known, never hated. Men with me, and somewhere among that silence, behind a shattered wall 40 yards away, no medal, no citation, no written history can fully capture what his final minutes must have felt like. The freezing stillness in his limbs, the rising weight in his lungs, the knowledge that the battle was over, but his life was not going with it. Reese did not die in the thrill of an assault or the triumph of a final shot. He died in the quiet space between duty and consequence. He died looking at the friend he had protected until his last breath. He died believing, with absolute clarity, that his sacrifice had mattered. There is a particular kind of tragedy in dying for something you cannot live. Rodriguez's return was not a march of victory. It was a walk of grief. He had survived because Reese had stayed behind, creating the illusion of danger with an empty rifle. He had survived because a friend had made himself a shield. The battlefield records describe it as covering fire. But what truly happened was simpler and more profound. one man, re4. War reduces life to brutal arithmetic R. In the internet, those who have, every hero. Reese, the Trockley, and still, even in its tragedy, these are not the lessons found in 10. War E. In the end, Paco. It is the story of one who came home and one who did not. The story of a Vi. The story of courage carved from. It teaches us that even in war, especially in war, Cleto Rodriguez lived. John Reese did know. And somewhere between cold, precise, and unexaggerated, like a historical